Welcome everybody then to our working lunch. We're going to be talking about web accessibility. We've titled this No Excuses because we've really reached that point where we can no longer, any organization that has been ignoring this can no longer ignore it. So I guess a quick overview, what is web accessibility? This is the idea that we want to make our websites inclusive, consistent, usable for everybody who accesses the web. Is sort of the statistic that's usually thrown around is it's about 25% of adults in the US using the internet. So it's not a small group of people. And this includes older adults, right? So a lot of the things that we think about in web accessibility are going to help older adults, a population that is continuing to grow. And those are people that might need more and more of these things as they're getting older. And a few things we talk about all the time as far as web accessibility, the things that we do for accessibility help all users. And so this is really important to note that it's not in conflict with SEO. It's not in conflict with design. It works for everybody. And so this, if you're trying to sort of pitch it across your company or anything like that, knowing that this is going to be an improvement for all your other touch points on the websites as well. And then I'll touch on this, but we'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. One of the reasons why there's no more excuses why this is so important right now is the European Accessibility Act, an act that has been in place for a few years now, is reaching a point where the enforcement measures for that act are coming into play. So essentially the grace period that companies have been given to get their websites up to speed is ending. You now need to be there. And the deadline for that is July of 2025. So if you're in the room today or if you're listening and we still need to do some work there, we've got till July 2025 to get that done. So we'll talk a little bit more about the European Accessibility Act in a little bit here. First, I'm going to actually pass to Jenna, who is, just got to get our tech in play. And actually, let me just say, so Jenna's going to go through a refresher for content authors. So we'll come to that in a second. Then again, we'll talk about what you need to know right now, and that has a bit to do with the Accessibility Act, and then what you might need to do to achieve compliance, and your plan for 2025 to make sure that you're hitting that date. I am going to then open up the Q&A. I hope to have a lot of time actually for that. So if you want to take, while we're talking over the next little bit, gather your questions and anything you need, we'll try to discuss it at the end. So the accessibility refresher for content authors is where we pass to Jenna. All Take right. It away.
Thank you. Okay. So basically, there's accessibility technical components that have to be coded on the back end, but then there's also a lot of content considerations that you need to be aware of as content authors. So if you're going in, adding new pages, updating existing pages, you just have to be aware of all of these content things that you need to do in order to maintain that accessibility level on your website. So the first one I want to talk about is you have to use a clear and logical structure of headings. So I have 4 columns here. This one goes from H1, 2 to H3 to H4, all the way down to 6. And this is the order that you need to maintain on your websites, is you want to make sure you're not jumping around and you're following this hierarchy. Now over here, we have a heading 1, a heading 2, a heading 3, then we go back to 2, then we have 2, and then we have 3. This is also still accessible because we're not skipping and jumping around. We are still following that hierarchy. And then here, again, we have heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I wanted to make heading 2 a little bit smaller here. So what I notice a lot of the time is people will break the logical structure for headings when they need to use a heading 2, but it's too big for the area. So maybe you're using it for like a card and the standard size that you have is just too big and it looks really bad in that card. So instead of shrinking down the heading 2, you might use a heading 3 because the heading 3 is naturally a little bit smaller and it fills the space a lot better. That's going to break your accessibility. So instead of doing that, what you want to do is you actually want to manually override the size for the heading, and you want to make it a little bit smaller, but keep it as the H2. If you're finding yourself doing this a lot, then you probably need to reevaluate your heading sizes and structure overall and kind of reevaluate it so that you don't have to manually override it a lot. But there probably will be instances where you do want to use a smaller heading, but it still needs to be an H2 in order to meet those accessibility needs. And then this 4th column here, we go from 1 to 3 to 2 to 5 to 4. So we're really jumping around here. We're skipping 2 in between this 1 and this 3. From 2 to 5, we're skipping 3 and 4. So this is where accessibility breaks down. So all of these columns here would pass. with the exception of this last column. And I'm going to click on this wave extension tool that is offered through Chrome. And what it does is it can flag certain accessibility errors. So you can see these two columns, these first three columns, we don't have any errors, but then this last column here, if I click on it, we're seeing, hey, skipped heading level. And you can see we have 3 skipped heading levels here. So these first 3 columns pass, this last one doesn't because we're skipping that hierarchy. So you might be wondering, why is heading structure so important? And the reason it's important is because it does create a clear structure of content on your web page for all users, especially for users who are using assistive technologies like screen readers. It allows them to easily navigate by jumping between the heading styles. So this assistive technology essentially works like you would when you're scanning through a website and you're just looking at all the headers. The assistive technology is doing the same thing. And if we have it like this, it's just going to jump around the page kind of in a wonky way. So it's going to be like, oh, here's the H1, here's the H2s. And then it's going to then goes to the H3s. And if you have this H3 above this H2, then it kind of jumps back up on the site. And it just makes it a really confusing user experience as well as for those users that are using these assistive technologies. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is the use of colors. So here I have a color palette listed up here. And what's really important about colors is if you're using them to display content, you need to make sure that you're hitting a high enough color contrast ratio so that users, even with visual impairments, have a okay time or easier time reading your content. So I have right here the YKG AA requirements. It requires a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 for that text, normal size text, and then 3 to 1 for large text. And I'll get into that in a little bit. But what I usually do for me when I start any website design project is I use this color palette builder. And I put in all of the colors that are going to be used for the design in there so I can better understand how I can use them for the website in order to meet those contrast ratio needs. So here we have this white column up here, and then you can see it's accessible with this dark teal, this like orange color, this blue background, because we're seeing that the white is on top of it, indicating that this is an okay color contrast that you can use. However, white is not accessible with this yellow, this green, or this white color, which is why we have this like grayed out box area. And so it really just tells you how you can use colors together to ensure you're meeting those color contrast ratios. So one thing you might notice is this green color is not accessible with anything. Does that mean we can't use it? No, you can still use it. You just can't use it to convey content. So if this green color is a prominent color for your brand, you can still use it as like decorative embellishments throughout your website to maintain that color. You just don't want to use it to convey any copy because people will have a hard time reading it when used with white or any of these colors represented here. So sometimes the colors just need to be tweaked a little tiny bit for accessibility. So if I wanted to use this blue color, for example, with white, this first box right here actually doesn't pass because it has a 4.43 to 1 contrast ratio as opposed to a 4.5 to 1. However, it's super close. So if you just tweak it a little bit, so this box over here has a 4.62 to 1 contrast ratio, that one will pass. This one will not. And you might not even notice the difference, or you might see it's very subtle. So sometimes you can adapt your colors and it's just a tiny little bit adaptation to make it more accessible, and you don't have to like change your whole brand document. You can just make that little shift for the web. And then that green color that we saw up here is not accessible with anything for color contrast needs, but actually this is only looking at normal text. There is certain requirements for large text. So large text is defined by using like 14 points, typically 18.66 pixels in bold or larger, or 18 points, typically 24 pixels or larger. So if the text meets those size requirements, then it can actually be used with white, in this case with the green color. So you can see that the small text right here will not pass because it doesn't meet that large text requirement. This large text here will pass because it's bold and 20 points, so it does meet that requirement, as does this one down here that's not bold, but it's larger. So you might not want to have body copy that's like 20 pixels in bold because that might be hard to read, or that large text might be too large. But what you could use this green for then is headings, because headings are typically already that size. They're typically already bigger. So you can use this green to convey like that size of copy. So if I use this wave extension here, again, that kind of helps flag any accessibility issues. You'll notice that, yep, this first one here doesn't pass just because we're slightly off that contrast ratio need, but this one does pass. And then here for the large text requirements, this text zone here passes, but we are getting a contrast alert for this one right here. All right. And this tool I showed you doesn't show you if the colors meet the large requirements. So I do use a different tool for that down here, which is called Web Aim. And so what you can essentially do is enter your color here, and you can enter a different color here. And then down here, it'll tell you if it passes for normal text requirements, large text requirements, graphical objects. And let's say this one was not passing, and we're like, oh man, I can't use this blue color with white. You can even just use the slider here to see when it starts to become accessible with white. So it's just a nice tool here to kind of know how you can adapt your colors and if it's a big shift or a little shift. And when it is a big shift, you have to just figure out a different method altogether. So for example, this yellow is super hard to make accessible with white. Like it's just, you can't do it. This bright yellow right here looks really nice, but this white text on it's not going to pass because that contrast ratio is just way too small. It's 2:1. And then if I wanted to use yellow with white, I would have to darken it this much in order for it to have that large text requirement, and this much to pass for that normal text requirement. So you can see that this is a dramatically different shade of yellow. So like your brand would dramatically shift. So you probably don't want to do that. Instead, you're just going to have to use black or darker text with that yellow. And so why is color contrast important? It's really important for people who have developed visual disabilities, maybe because they got older, maybe they have temporary visual impairments because of surgery or a medical condition, or they're just dealing with different forms of color blindness. So meeting these requirements does make it easy for those users as well as just for everyone in general. All right, so now I want to talk about links in content. So in this paragraph here, I have 3 different links, and you might be able to see them because the color is a little bit different, but they don't really jump out at you. So this actually is not accessible because the links are really hard to see, and you can't really rely on the color change alone for that indication. Here's the exact same paragraph with the exact same links, but you can see them a lot clearer, a lot quicker because they're underlined in addition to that color change. So you just want to make sure when you have links in content like this that they're really easy for users to see and understand that these are clickable elements. And then if this link is going to take you to a different website, completely away from your site, you do want to have this little icon here that indicates, hey, user, you're leaving the site, you're going to a third-party resource, and it lets them understand that that's going to happen so they don't get super disorientated when they're at a completely new area. And another consideration is having links like this can be really hard for assistive technologies to read. It is a lot better to have just more text like this that links off to that URL as opposed to just listing out the URL. You can imagine that when assistive technology or screen readers read that to the client, it is a lot longer and more cumbersome than just having more descriptive text that describes where they're going. All right. So again, same with the links, it applies to the buttons. You do want to make sure that you're not relying on a color change alone for that hover effect. So this first button right here, when I hover over it, it just changes to like a little bit of a lighter shade of blue here. So you might be able to see that change, but some of the visual users that have visual impairments won't see that. So it's not a clear enough hover effect to meet accessibility requirements. However, look at this button next to it. It does pass. And you might be like, what? You're just using a color change here too. But it's actually not. It's a contrast shift, and visual users will be able to see that. So you can see that we have the text in yellow with a dark box behind it. And then when I hover over it, that yellow text turns dark, and then the box behind it turns that yellow. So even though it appears to be a simple color shift, it's not. It's considered a contrast shift, which then meets those accessibility requirements. Then there are other options you can do as well, like having an icon appear on hover. We have a contrast shift in addition with a border. So adding that border helps make this accessible because it's relying on more than just a simple color change. And then same kind of concept of links up here. It's really nice when they're a little bit more descriptive as opposed to just listing the URL. We would like the buttons to be a little bit more descriptive as well. So when you have links like learn more, click here, doesn't really indicate to the user where they're going. So try to make them descriptive, like view our services or contact us, read our blog. Make the buttons a little bit more descriptive so the user understands where they're going. Now, there will be cases where you probably have to leverage the learn more or the click here's. And there's stuff that we can do on the back end to make sure that screen readers get that little bit extra description that they need for those users to understand where they're going. So why can't you rely on cover alone for hover effects? And again, it's just to address those color deficiencies. So many people do have a form of color vision deficiency, such as color blindness. And then according to various studies, this approximately affects 8% of men and 0.5% of women worldwide. So that's a pretty large pool of people that would be missing out on your content or having issues navigating your content if you're just relying on those color changes. And then I've also been asked, but it's not just a color change. My cursor is changing. Isn't that enough? And it's not considered enough by YKG standards, considered to be too subtle. And then keyboard navigators don't even have cursors. So that wouldn't apply to those users. And overall, just your users expect more. So we have a great medium here where we can add that movement, add that interactivity, and that's kind of what your users expect. Was there a question? All right. So do you want to talk about the use of icons? So there's some universally recognizable icons that people just understand what they mean. And there's some icons that are just used more for decoration. So you can't have those stand alone because they're going to be really ambiguous for users to understand what they are. So for example, many people are familiar with this Facebook icon that's universally used for social media. We have the YouTube icon, we have an email icon, a chat, a share, the location pin, the pause button, a calendar icon, and this I just showed you guys with the external link icon, the Wi-Fi, a search, a PDF, and a download icon. So these are all icons that people can recognize and understand the action that goes along with them. So for example, if you see the search icon, you know there's probably going to be some sort of search here that if I click on it, I can start a search for either a blog or the whole website. If you see these icons, the share, print, and email at the upper hand side of your screen, you understand that, hey, I can probably share this page, I can print this page, I can email this page quite easily. And then for this chat feature, if you see it in the lower right-hand side, you're probably going to immediately know like, oh, this website offers a chat and understand what that icon means. On the other hand, when we have these icons, it is, if you use them without any additional insight, you'd have no idea what they were. So we have a bone here, a turkey leg, a bird, a cup, an apple. We have all these kind of fun, more decorative icons, but they could have super ambiguous meanings. So down here, you can see I paired the apple with the lunch menu. So the apple is meant more to be a decorative component, but I definitely need to include that verbiage of lunch menu with it so users understand what I'm trying to convey. And so again, why do icons need some text? And it's again, because they can be really ambiguous without it. So even well-designed icons might not universally be understood. So different users can interpret those icons differently. So you just want to avoid any confusion at all and just understand that some icons are used more for decoration while others do convey information and action. The next thing I want to talk about is forms. So forms are pretty much on every website, and you just want to make sure that your forms are set up right because that is a really common and popular point where users are converting on your website. So you want to ensure that form labels are clear and visually connected to their inputs. So name, I know to enter my name here. Email, I know to enter it here. And again, error messages, you want them to be as helpful as you can because you really don't want to put up a ton of barriers for your users when they're trying to fill out your form and reach out to you. Like it's very important to get that right. So here, oops, sorry, Sydney, I hate the mouse. All right, so here if I enter my name, and then for email, I'm just going to write test. And I'm not going to fill out your message, even though I see that that's required because I want to get some error messages here. So if I submit this form, you'll see right at the top, it's indicating, hey, there was a problem with your submission. And so I know immediately with this exclamation point, this text here, that my submission didn't go through. And in addition to that, it even highlights with this black border around the input field. It turns a different color. And then below that, we even have a better description of what went wrong. So the email address entered is not valid. Yep, that's definitely not an email address I entered here. So please check the formatting, and then it even gives me the correct format that I need. So it's very descriptive and very helpful so that I can immediately make that fix. And then down here, hey, this field is actually required. Okay, so I need to put some text here as well. And I need to make this an email address. And I'm very easily able to make those fixes and then go ahead and submit my form. So let's see what it looks like when it doesn't work that way. This is fine. Okay, so here we have a contact form and the labels are actually inside the fields. So if I start filling in text like this, What's annoying is, hey, I might have just like accidentally gone through it too fast and filled it in wrong, but now I'm losing those labels. So now I'm like, oh wait, this isn't right, but what is it? And it's not clear to me what I did wrong until I delete it, and then I see the input field. So that's why it's better for accessibility to put it on the outside, so it never hidden and it avoids any confusion. So if I go ahead and submit this again, knowing that I'm filling the form out wrong, this is just a really valid point in why color contrast is important. I can highlight this and you can see I'm getting that same error message. Hey, there was a problem. But if I don't have enough color contrast, I can't see there was a problem. I might miss that completely. And so I have no idea my form wasn't submitted. It does help that this input field here has a darker border on it to indicate something's wrong, but it doesn't tell me what's wrong. So I have no idea what I did wrong. And I also don't even remember that this is supposed to be an email. And then this field right here is required, but it's not even flagging it as an issue. So you can see how this would be really frustrating for a user, any user, not just anybody with accessibility requirements, but any user in general would get really frustrated and probably, abandon this form. So let me go back. Okay, so again, why are error fields important for accessibility? They just provide that clarity and specificity that's needed. So vague error messages just can confuse users, especially those with cognitive disabilities. So clear and specific messaging does help users fix the exact issue without any additional frustration. And then screen reader feedback. Error messages have to be programmatically linked to the form fields. This way screen readers can announce the errors in context instead of again going in a wonky order. So it just allows users with visual impairments to address these issues directly. Okay. Now let's talk about text alignment. For most websites, left-aligned text does work best, especially if you have a lot of body copy. Just more readable. If you think about books and magazines, they all use left-aligned text. So we want to mirror that on the website as well. And you can see here we have the center line text, which just makes it harder to read. The readability of it is a little rougher because we're not starting at the same point. Our eye has to keep jumping and working to find where I left off, and it's just not consistent, which causes a harder reading experience. And right line to text can be even worse. So that's why you definitely don't see a whole lot of that on websites. But you might be calling me out because I did use center line text here, center line text here. And so you're like, hey, what's going on? And it's okay to do that when you have one or two sentences. But as soon as you get into a lot of body copy like this, that's when you really get those issues, readability concerns. So down here, I have this how to choose your proper alignment. And it's basically saying left align is probably the best way to go, especially for all your body copy. It's easier on the eyes and it just flows naturally for most readers. The centered align text works well for headings and very short blurbs or calls to actions. So it can actually add emphasis to content and to the eye, but it can just be a lot harder to read in long form text. And then right align, just don't even go there. You can use it rarely, I guess, for author bios or captions, but that's the one you definitely want to limit the use of the most. So in general, we want to stick with left alignment for long text, reserve that center alignment for the shorter text, and use it a little bit sparingly as well. Okay. Another design consideration is so I'm using my desktop right now, and I have this mouse, and it's very precise. So I can easily click all of these icons. However, if I was not on a desktop and I'm using a tablet or a phone, I don't have this little precise mouse. I have my big fat thumb that I'm trying to click on all of these links on. So here you can see these icons are spaced and large enough where clicking it with my thumb, no issue. I can easily click that LinkedIn icon in the middle there without accidentally clicking on that Facebook or YouTube icon that's next to it. However, these are really small and they're really tightly placed together that if I try to click on that LinkedIn one, I might get it. I might be precise enough with my thumb, but I might also miss it. And I might click on Facebook or YouTube. So it's really important just to be aware of we have mobile devices now, we have tablets now, and that experience is a little bit different than on desktops because we no longer have that cursor. So you really want to pay attention to those target sizes. So ideally, at least 44 by 44 pixels in space provides enough clickable element around the area that it's easier for you to navigate it with your thumb. So another time where this comes into play, besides just social media icons, is right here. I have this carousel, and you can see I have these little tiny dots down here that I can click with my mouse fairly accurately, but they definitely would be harder to click with my thumb. So what should we do? We should make them this big. No, this looks ridiculous. If you don't have a huge, a lot of big elements in your website design, like this is going to just feel out of place and super awkward. So instead, what you can do is just increase the size and the spacing a little bit. And then I will show you with my cursor. I'm hovering not on the dot, but near the dot. And I still have that. My cursor is changing to indicate like, hey, I can click here. And so even though the dot does not look this huge, the target space for clickability is still that big. So that will help me with the accessibility requirements. I'd also recommend on mobile devices, just for even improved user experience, is instead of relying on the dots alone, if you can just slide with your thumb, you would just take your thumb and go like this. You don't even have to rely on the dots.
Can I interject something there, Jenna?
Yeah.
Another way that this becomes important is not just on touchscreens, but actually if there was somebody using a mouse, but who didn't have really fine motor control, right? Maybe they're a little shaky. They're also going to struggle to reach that small target, right? So it can be for a mouse user as well.
Yes, good point. And then another option too is just having the carrots on the side here, which naturally can be a little bit bigger and that feels more natural. So, okay. The last area I want to talk about pertaining to things to consider with content design is overlaying content with images. So here, fun image of a dog, really cute, probably really hard to read that text. So if you could read it, it would say, you should probably put an overlay behind text in order to make it more legible for your users. And then like sometimes you just have really nice dark images where it's like, hey, this is easy to read. I don't have to worry about doing anything like this. I'm pretty much using a dark blue and black with white. Like that's for sure going to meet ratio issues. So if I go back up here and I click on my wave tool, yep, look at this. Very low contrast, all of the warnings. Then I go down here, oh, I still see them. What's going on? I go down here and I still see them. There's no way this doesn't pass. And that's because these automated tools don't work with images. So it doesn't even interpret there's an image there. So it's going to flag this as potentially like a false accessibility issue. So you'll see when I click it, it completely disregards the image and it's reading it as white text with a white background. So it's just not smart enough to like interpret, hey, there's actually an image down here with, or an image behind here with colors. So you will definitely experience that. Yes, Scott?
So when you get these scores back from the external testing companies, they're often victim of that same false. So they're flagging this stuff as problematic when it's not.
Yeah.
Giving you a low score. They're saying your site doesn't pass, so you might be getting bad info.
If it's from an automated tool, yeah, and you've got a third-party audit, odds are they're just going to report what the tool says. They might come back and say, it's possible some of these things are false positives, and that is always the case. So you could have false positives.
Yeah, it's kind of a conundrum. How do you push back to the testing companies when they tell you that this image right here is no good?
Mm-hmm. So I will show you what you can do.
All right.
There's this tool that I use. It's called an image checker. So what you do is when you go to it, you can upload your image. You can change the color of your font. You can even change the size of your font. And you take it and you drag it around. And then it says, yep, this isn't going to work here because we have white text over white flowers. Of course, that's going to be hard to read. But if I take this image or this text and I move it down here, oh, it works here. Look, we're passing with flying colors, so I can use this image. But what you do need to also be cognizant of is websites are responsive. So where's this text going to be when this image is on a mobile device? Like, is it then going to be over it? Because now we're breaking contrast ratio issues again. So it's fun to put text on images. It can look great. You just have to make sure that we're hitting those contrast ratios and we're doing so across all devices. So, all right. So I think that's all I have. Sydney, if you want to take it away.
Jenna, there's a question that came in through chat. And basically just for request to go back through the headings again, column 2 of the headings example that you had shared.
Oh, one second,
sure.
Jenna, let me get you there.
Okay.
Well, where is it? There you go.
Thank you. Just to walk through it again.
Yeah, particularly the second column that you were talking through.
Okay. Yeah, I can understand the confusion that might be happening here because it feels like we're jumping around. What we have to pay attention to is we're not actually skipping heading levels. So 1 is next to 2, 2 is next to 3, and then 3 is next to 2, even though it's before 2. But we're not going to go, heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 perfectly down a page like that. That's not realistic to your content needs. So you're going to have multiple headings on a page that need to be H2s. So the rule is that we want one H1 on every page, and that's for like SEO and to make sure that the content of the page is clear. We can have multiple H2s, multiple H3s, multiple H4s on a page, but they're not going to go all the way down to H6 most of the time. So it's okay to go from 2 to 3 and then back to 2. It wouldn't be okay to go 2 to 3 and then like to 5 or 5. You don't want to jump. And so here we're going back, but we're not jumping and skipping.
Another way to explain that is that these are nested, right? So on this page, you've essentially got 3 in column 2 here. Imagine it's a web page. You've got 3 sections, 3 primary sections that are each designated by an H2. The first of those sections has a nested H3, and the last of those sections has a nested H3. So the hierarchically down below inside of that section, whereas that middle H2 section, it doesn't have any further need for hierarchy inside of it.
Yeah, headings seem pretty straightforward, but then when I start inputting a lot of content, like it can get confusing. So I do reach out to like our strategy team a lot. And I'm like, hey, just want to check on this. Is this okay? But then again, we also have these wave tools extensions too that you can use to kind of get that insight as well.
Jump back. Okay, so to recap, Jenna did just talk about heading structure and hierarchy, color palettes and color contrast, links and content, visual button styles and states for focus and hover, iconography. And I would say, remember on that one too, even if it is something really, obvious visually like that Facebook icon, you'll still need something behind the scenes textually for a screen reader, for example, and have that alt text or however otherwise programmatically you're getting it in there. She also talked about forms and interactions, super important for accessibility, clearly, because that's a way that your user isn't just consuming content, but is also trying to interact back with you. Typography, touch targets, and then text over images, which is a very tricky one. And actually on that last one, I'll just say too, we always advise to use live text, right? You could do text over image nicely in a graphic, but if that's not live text on your website, odds are it might be difficult for a person to consume it at all. Okay, so back to what do you need to know right now? I mentioned the European Accessibility Act, which is, this enforcement measures are coming into play let's say summer of next year. So who does this apply to? It applies to all companies doing business within the EU. So you don't have to be located in the EU, but if your customers are, then this is going to apply to you. And unlike some previous legislation, this does target private sector entities. So it's a legal requirement for private sector, public sector, et cetera. It applies to things, a whole list of things, but includes websites, mobile phones, kiosks, e-commerce, all kinds of digital things, again, media that people are going to consume. It's not explicitly WCAG 2.2, but basically, if that's what you're aiming for, that's the standard that's going to be good for this one as well. Or it's at least something that you can sort of generically go, this is my target, and feel good about. And then there is an explicit exclusion for accessibility overlays and widgets. If you're not familiar with these, it's essentially, you've probably seen it somewhere out in the wild where, like your chat bubble, there might be like another little icon you can click on or somehow access and potentially get some further help tools. I'm saying potentially because in my experience, they can actually hamper more than they can help, which is the general contention across the accessibility universe, which is why they're explicitly excluded from the EAA right now. So if you do have one of those on your site, you're going to want to, in my opinion, you would want to remove it and then work towards some sort of more native within your website remediation if necessary. And I say if necessary because I have actually seen those widgets put on sites that aren't that bad and become worse. And so it would, of course, be really important first to know how bad is my site or how good is my site? That would be even better. To that question, I would say if you don't know, it's probably bad. Unfortunately, that's the state of the web, right? It's easy to kind of think like, oh, how could this be so bad? Like, why haven't people been building accessible websites from the beginning? And the answer is we just haven't. And the awareness and practices are getting better. They're still not there yet. My hope would be that this Accessibility Act in Europe, it helps really push things along, but it's not there yet. So if you're not aware of working toward accessibility on your website, let's say last time you did a redesign, something like that, odds are you've got some remediation to do. So that's sort of the overview of it, but there's lots of ways that we can, and actually I think on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what you can do right now to check your site and to do some quick remediation as well. So on that note, what do you need to do to prepare for the Accessibility Act as it comes into play? First, as we just discussed, assess your website's current level of compliance. So again, some things you can do on your own for that, and then also reach out to experts to get that more nitty-gritty level of what might need to be done. Educate your whole team on accessibility standards. So this is everywhere from, the content authors, web developers, stakeholders in, different features that are going to come into play or new content as it comes into the pipeline. So essentially across your whole organization from CEO down, you need to have this sort of eye on accessibility. And then allocate budget and resources for accessibility initiatives. If you're not already compliant, you're probably going to need to do some remediation, and it does cost money. The thing about accessibility, like everything, is it's more efficient, more effective, more cost effective to do it right away. So to do it in the midst of a development of something rather than coming back and having to remediate it. If you're using a website overlay tool, you're going to want to reevaluate the use of that tool. And then when you have this knowledge of, sort of what's currently not in compliance, what's my plan to remediate and get into compliance? So I'm going to do a quick shout out to a webinar that we did, and Jamie's going to drop this link in the chat. This is another No More Excuses. That's where we're at right now. A webinar where I mentioned these. I'm going to go through a quick list here of things that you can do right now on your website, things that are often out of compliance and really easy to fix. So one of those things is making sure that the page language is set. This is important everywhere, but imagine if you were in Europe where there's a lot of languages a lot of the time, this is going to be even more important, right? Make sure that your images have alt tags. Arrange your page headings in logical order, like Jenna just discussed. Ensure all iframes have a descriptive title. So when you place that iframe code on the page, you may have to go in and manually type a title attribute and a descriptive title for your iframe. So this could be anything from like embedded forms you have to, another system, third-party content if you have some kind of tool, But then importantly, your videos, right? If you have iframe embedded videos, YouTube, from what I've found, when you grab that embed code, it says YouTube video or something like that for the title. What you want to do is put in the title of your YouTube video, something descriptive about the video itself, so that the user knows that they want to click and actually watch this particular video. What else do we have here? Forms and inputs have labels. So Jenna kind of gave some description there and some visual, of the labels as well, and how important it is that those labels are descriptive, that they're attached to the inputs and programmatically, and ideally that they're outside and still visible while you're interacting with that form input itself. Because, to Jenna's point earlier, if there's like a telephone, I'm supposed to put the telephone number in a certain way, and that's inside of that input, and as soon as you start typing, it disappears. I mean, halfway through my phone number, I'm like, was I supposed to put a dash in or not? I can't remember. And you'd have to actually delete it all, look at that again, and then remind yourself how it was you're supposed to type it. So anything like that that's frustrating, takes users longer, maybe they can't even complete it. And this is whether it's anybody, with a disability or not, right? Color contrast, as Jenna said, and then make sure you have a published accessibility statement. And I think I'll pause on that for a second, but come back and talk a little bit about accessibility statements after a slide or two. All right, so how can Northwoods help you achieve accessibility compliance? Several of the things that we can do, or one of the things we can do is site auditing. There's several ways that we can do that. If you're in the room here right now, you've got this sheet in front of you that lists these out. If you're not in the room, Jamie's again going to put a link in the chat for some further resource for you. We can do full site audits, which is something that you might need if, let's say, you've already had some kind of legal action and it's being required of you that you learn everything about your website. We can also do, what we call like an iterative site audit. So we might look briefly at the site, find the worst thing that we can quickly find that we could quickly fix, and quickly fix it, right? So we're sort of taking immediate action that's going to improve your website, find those impactful things, fix them right away, and then come back and sort of dig into the next level as it goes. I find that to be really the best way to improve your website immediately, give your users a better chance of accessing, and just start making changes right away. So prioritizing high impact updates is exactly what that is. It's just whether you've done a full site audit and then you do that prioritization, or you just start looking at things, we tend to know what are things that are often broken and quickly fixed. So we'll just go and look for those first and then fix them. We can help you develop a roadmap to full compliance. So again, testing to see where you're at and then making a plan to get you all the way to compliance. Training your team is really important. We kind of talked about that a few slides ago about how this is just something everybody needs to be involved in. And training is required. Training from content authors, like everything Jenna just went through, training developers, and then just training across sales and every other part of this ecosphere to always be thinking about this, knowing that it's something we need to be talking about and getting into project scope. And then ongoing monitoring. So let's say you get your site to full compliance, but of course websites are sort of living and you're constantly changing content and you're creating new features. All of those things, hopefully we're thinking about them as they're going in, but then ongoing monitoring allows us to keep continuing to ensure that you're in compliance over time. So with the EAA coming in next year, we do want to make sure that you have a plan for 2020-25. And what I would say about that specifically is, of course, reach out to us for a plan. But my message about accessibility generally is that it really doesn't have to be that hard. It does come down to everybody understanding it and just getting it into your daily workflow, making sure it's part of conversations early and often, and that everybody just knows this is how we're doing it. It can be difficult in the beginning as training has to get up to speed, or if you're in a place of really not non-compliance, then it can be hard. But once you sort of get rolling, it doesn't have to be a monumental task. It can just be part of your day-to-day, just in there with everything else. So we have time for questions. Did anything happen to come in the chat?
Yeah, we did get a question in the chat to share an example of an accessibility tool overlay. Like an Accessity or something like that.
I could go to Accessity's website. Do you know of any?
I know Prison Strategy has one. Prison Strategy.
Okay.
You want to see an example of what it's like, or?
No, I can't see the. Okay, so you see this little button, this blue button over on the left-hand side, kind of part way down. It's interesting that they put it there, and we could look on their mobile version as well. But what I have seen sometimes is this chat button or this accessible widget button placed right in the top right corner on mobile, actually completely obscuring the navigation for mobile, right? And so this is a pretty obvious way of how adding it to your site can make things worse and not better. So obviously placement's important. They found this spot in the bottom left that they seemed to, they decided was a good spot to put it. But that's the example. And so it has all these options in here. For example, you could turn on a screen reader, color contrast, etc. I'm actually not super familiar with these because I don't go in here often. But what I do know is a lot of these things can already be done by your browser. So I can increase the zoom level on my browser, all modern browsers. This didn't used to be the case, but now it is. I can hit the Control+, Control-, and increase zoom level on my browser, which people do quite a bit. And I don't need to have clicked 3 times into the, to find this widget and open it and then find the right button inside of the widget and, et cetera, especially because this widget isn't on every website, but my browser is right there on every website. So that's another reason why, that in addition to sometimes being a handprints, these are in other ways just not necessary because there's additional tools available. I will show you one thing that I think is pretty neat. We'll try it on the Breeks website. So if I do Control++ right now, I'm just going to keep hitting Control+. You can see it's increasing the zoom level, but you can also see as I get further in here, now the website looks like the mobile website, right? And so that's sort of the beauty of responsive design. The reason I bring it up right now is it's another reason why your mobile site needs to be accessible, is some people might actually be accessing your mobile site on a desktop the way that I am right here, just because they've zoomed into it that far. And so we'd want to make sure that you can access this mobile menu, which with the keyboard, which I'm doing right now. And I got in there, but now as I continue to hit the tab key, I'm actually not able to see visually. There's no visual focus state on which one of these links I might be clicking on. So I got into the mobile menu, but I can't use it. Once I'm here, I'm going to hit the escape key to see if I can exit the menu.
We did not design the site.
No, we did not design the site. I'm sorry to be picking on these guys. They just happen to come up. But I'm hitting escape. I can't exit the menu. So I'm kind of stuck. There's nothing I can do right now. I entered and going into that accessibility widget right now, if I could get there, I don't know how it would help me. The idea is that the AI of this widget, can kind of see some things and fix some things. And that's great. I mean, that would be amazing if it did work, but we're kind of seeing right now that it's not a, I don't know, cure all.
Sydney, there's another clarifying question that came in, asking if you can clarify what you mean by the standard of compliance being level 2.2. Pete says here, I believe that EAA and the upcoming U.S. government law is 2.1 AA. I just want to make sure I didn't miss something.
Yeah, no, as of this exact moment, I think Pete is right. I also think it's about to change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Change how?
Going to 2.2.
Okay.
And so because 2.2 exists, it's my recommendation that we just start to use that standard, because why not, right? If you're going to be working towards compliance right now, set that as your standard, because it's going to become what you need to, have soon enough.